Lord, on this kind of crazy night with the weather, we ask that you keep everyone safe that's here in this building, and also our friends and families that are still out in this weather. Also ask that you guide us in our decisions tonight and keep the safety. Our soldiers are still in Iraq and Afghanistan. Amen.
Amen. If you would, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's good to see you out this evening, and board members present this evening is Mr. Bobby Popowitz, which represents the Port Royal District, Mr. Jeff Seeley, representing the Bowling Green District, Mr. Maxie Roselle, representing the Reedy Church District, and I'm Wayne Akers, and I represent the Madison District. The next item on the agenda is the amendments to the agenda. Mr. Ashcraft.
Mr. Chairman, if you would refer to your agenda, and I would ask ladies and gentlemen you do the same, because there are several items that we will request to be pulled this evening. Because of the weather, we want to try to get out at a decent hour, and I will ask the board to confirm these requests. Item 3 under presentations and reports, the first 3 have been removed. Museum Exploratory Committee, Senior Navigator, and updates of the indoor plumbing and rehabilitation funds. We still will hear from Mr. Parton on the Community Service Act supplemental request. Then if you would go to the back of your agenda, item 9 will be removed. Item 11, item 12, item 13, and item 14. Not 11? 11 is back on? Or 11 is on? Okay, that's right, I'm sorry, because that's the one from GWRC. So 11 is on, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Anything else we're requesting to be removed this evening? And these will return, sorry, number 2. Okay, that wasn't a report. And the Literacy Council, item 2, is also removed, and all these will be back on your agenda on February the 10th unless status changes somewhere in between.
All right. Board members have heard the recommendations of the county administrator. Is there a motion to approve the amended agenda?
So moved.
Second. Motion made by Mr. Popowitz, seconded by Mr. Roselle, that we accept the amended agenda. Discussion of the motion. All in favor vote by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The motion is carried, and the agenda will be amended as presented. Opening board comments. Mr. Popowitz?
Yes, I do have a couple, actually.
Okay.
Last week, I met with Gary Wilson and Mr. Ashcraft and also with Alan Parton. We discussed some of the economic development issues for Caroline County, and part of that discussion was that we are going to put together an economic planning team that consists of course, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Ashcraft heading that team, and Mr. Fincham and our new Director of Utilities would be on that team, as well as Eric Cunningham from schools as part of that team, and see if we can come up with some planning guidance as a county, and work a little more closely together and get some of these wayward things that we kind of seem to need to get a handle on, and see if we can improve our economic development situation and kind of be ahead of the game over some of the other counties in the area.
Super. Thank you, Mr. Popowitz. Mr. Seeley?
No, sir.
Mr. Roselle?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
And I have none either. The next item on the agenda is one we always look forward to when we can recognize an outstanding employee. And in fact, and this time we're going to recognize the 2008 Employee of the Year. I'm going to ask Mr. Ashcraft if he would make the recognition and presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. For the last several years, we have had a program within county government that has recognized employees of the quarter, and each time those employees would come before the board and be recognized, and they are automatically nominated for the honor of Employee of the Year. I will say before I announce the winner that this will be the last Employee of the Year recognition that we will have for a little while. We don't have a large employee base in the county, and sometimes your turnover has to be created, and you have to start some different programs. So we will have another way in which we will recognize employees next year. So this is what will be a final Employee of the Year ending in calendar year 2008. But the final one is a good one, a selection that wasn't really very hard for me to make, because this young lady has done an outstanding job in the Office of Economic Development and Tourism since she started working there. Particularly in 2008, one of the hardest things that she had to do was to really be in the center of moving the Office of Economic Development and Tourism down to the Visitor Center. And anybody who has moved an office knows that that is no easy task. You have to keep track of all the things that are in one office and then try to figure out where they're supposed to go in the second office. And obviously to continue to keep communications going within the department while this transition was taking place. She is also really beyond the responsibilities of an administrative assistant. She has also done a very good job of coordinating many of the public relations activities that goes on within the Department of Economic Development. And that's not only in coordinating mailings and appointments, but it's also actually making person-to-person contact and really giving Caroline County its first face before it has the opportunity to talk with a prospect or a particular individual who may be trying to find more information about Caroline County. She is very personable. She is a hard worker, and she's very dedicated to her family and the advancement of her children in trying to be active in the community and trying to make a difference in what we all hope will be a better Caroline County in the future. So with that, Mr. Chairman and members of the board and ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to recognize and ask if she would come up on the stage to receive her recognition, the 2008 Employee of the Year, Cassie Ruby in the Economic Development Department. Chairman, you want to take it from there? Mr. Chairman?
You do still live over on, you do still live on the west side? Yeah, see, guys, I told you, it's Madison District. Ruby, we really want to thank you for what you do for Caroline County and for the people of Caroline County, and in recognition, we'd like to give you this small plaque. It says Caroline County 2008 Employee of the Year is awarded to Cassie Ruby in a recognition of your outstanding performance as an employee of Caroline County, Virginia. Presented this 27th day of January 2009, Percy C. Ashcraft, County Administrator, and Wayne Akers, Chairman of the Board of Supervisors. We really appreciate you. Mean a lot to Gary and to Gary's office, and we appreciate all that you do for Caroline County. Everything's All right. Should I have it out, right? Well, let's take a picture of all the board members. Effort of all the board members, not just the chairman. Every year, it's the entire board. All right, Mark, where do you want us? You're fine. You're fine. Getting nice and close. Cassie, you come. Yeah. Okay. All right. A little further. Back up a little. Good. Okay. Bring in a little bit. Back your arm. Down. Up. All right. All right here. Let me get a couple more. Cassie, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Sure. Just the two of them, okay. Gary, I know you're proud of what she does in your office, and we're proud of her as well. The next item on the agenda is presentations and reports, and Mr. Pardon, I believe you're going to handle the Comprehensive Services Act supplemental funding request.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. And also have Pat Wright, the CPMT chair, here this
I thought
evening
that's right.
to help.
Good to see you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, you have before you tonight a request for additional local funds of the county's Comprehensive Services Act budget for the current fiscal year in the amount of $47,471. As you know, I believe the General Assembly adopted the Comprehensive Services Act in 1993, and it's designed to pool funds for at-risk youth and their families. CSA mandated services are provided funds by a combination of the state and local government. And the local match for Caroline varies depending on the type of services provided, but averages around 33%. The county's Community Policy and Management Team, or CPMT, which administers the program on the local level, recently submitted a supplemental request to the state for additional funding in the current fiscal year, because by looking at the expenditures and encumbrances to date for the rest of the fiscal year, it became obvious that the budgeted funds were not going to be adequate to meet those expenses. And the supplemental request, which, by the way, was recently approved by the state, was in the amount of $890,000 in round numbers. And the local share of that is $280,000, which is actually less than 33%. However, because the county wisely adopts a CSA budget that's much more realistic than the state, significantly less local money will be needed to meet our share of the match. For example, the state approved CSA budget for the county for fiscal year 2009. The current year is $626,140. In contrast, the county adopted budget is $1,332,578. So the bottom line is the county has already built in a significant cushion for local funds into its adopted budget. And as a result of that, $47,000 is needed in new local money as opposed to the $280,000 that you see in the state supplemental request. CPMT is hopeful that no additional supplemental appropriations to the state will be necessary. In fact, we're working on trying to reduce expenditures where we can. Lisa Rorty, who's the school special ed supervisor, has been working hard on trying to find reductions in expenditures. However, I will say that the request before you tonight is only for identified cases existing now. Any new cases that happen between now and the end of the fiscal year will obviously add to the cost and may send us back to the state for another supplemental funding request. That's all the comments I have, Mr. Chairman.
Questions?
Happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Pardon? Yes, Mr. Seeley.
Mr. Parton, in years past, do we have any sort of idea what the curve looks like for the CSA funds from, mid-year to the end of the year? Have we seen a typical, is it typically that the budget goes up unexpectedly, or does it pretty much follow the curve that we're on now?
Pat, I would ask you to come up and help me with that if you would. I think it's pretty unpredictable, Mr. Seeley. One year can differ substantially from the next, from my experience. It really is just a function of how many cases happen to land in your lap in a given year and at what time. Would you agree with me?
I'm sorry. We had an unexpected case in Caroline County this year that we inherited from Stafford. We had no choice in accepting this case. This case is the most expensive that we have had thus far. We tried everything that we could to get out of it. Legally, we cannot because it was in an IEP. The family moved to this county, and along with the family came this young man. This is an exception to the rule. Each year, our funding goes up because each year we have more and more complicated cases. Lisa Rorty, who is in charge of special ed, she's a coordinator for special ed in Caroline County Public Schools, has done everything she can to bring children home that have been in residential placement. She is doing everything she can for the betterment of the child and for the good of the citizens of Caroline County to cut expenses. We have no control over what children need. The only thing is that this one case has really put us over the top. There's nothing we can do about it.
Okay, so it's out of the norm then for our normal budgeting process?
This particular one, yes,
Okay.
but each year our funds a little higher. Each year prices go up
Yeah.
Right,
for treatment.
right.
Yeah.
And the caseload continues to go up as well.
Other questions?
That's it, Mr. Wright?
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Wright. Appreciate it. And we are going to need a motion to approve the supplemental appropriation of $47,471
Mr.
for...
Chairman, I make a motion that we appropriate the $47,471 from the county's undesignated fund balance.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been made by Mr. Rozell, seconded by Mr. Seeley, that we approve the supplemental appropriation, the Comprehensive Services Act for FY 2009 in the amount of $47,471 to come from unencumbered reserve funds. Discussion on the motion. All in favor vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is consent agenda, approval of minutes, approval of warrants, review of planning commission actions, approval of change order number 11 for Don wastewater project, and approval of supplemental school appropriation. Is there discussion or is there an item that any board member wishes to withdraw? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Popowitz, seconded by Mr. Seeley, that we approve the consent agenda as presented. Discussion on the motion. All in favor vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion is carried. Public comments. At this point, we'll open the floor up to anyone that would like to make comments to the board, as long as it is not comments that would later be referenced in the public hearing. So if there's anyone that would like to make comments to the board, please do so at this time. Is there anyone who would like to make comments to the board on any issue except what's on public hearings? If you would, please do so now. Hearing no comments, the public comment period is closed. Next item is public hearings. The first public hearing we have this evening is Special Exception 05-2008, Rappahannock Electric Cooperative, owner and applicant. Mr. Fitcher.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, first public hearing tonight is SPEX 05-2008, Rappahannock Electric Cooperative owner and applicant. They're requesting a special exception permit in accordance with Article 17, Section 13, Article 14, Section 5.21, and Article 15, Section 8B of the Caroline County zoning ordinance on tax parcel 102-A-61B. Subject property contains approximately 1.867 acres, is zoned RP, and is located in a Reedy Church District at 31081 Old Dawn Road, which is State Route 651. The proposed use is a telecommunications facility. The 2006-2026 comprehensive plan identifies this area as being in the Dawn Village area with a designation of planned mixed-use development. The Planning Commission held its public hearing on November 19th of 2008 related to this request and deferred action on this item at several meetings out of concerns about the proximity to the Second Mount Zion Baptist Church. After a work session between the applicant and the church, all of the perceived concerns related to the location of this facility were addressed, and the Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval of this request, subject to the 14 conditions contained on pages 5 through 7. As part of the board's action tonight, in addition to granting the special exception request, the board also specifically needs to grant a modification to the 120-foot setback requirement, which the Planning Commission recommended due to the design of the tower. The 120-foot or the 120-foot requirement is there to make sure that if a tower falls, that there's an adequate fall zone and no structures or other properties are adversely impacted. The design of this tower will allow the tower to collapse upon itself, and therefore the Planning Commission felt that the modification was warranted. Staff concurs with the Planning Commission's recommendation that this be approved, subject to the 14 conditions and the granting of the modification to the setback.
Okay. Questions of Mr. Fincham? Mr. Fincham, I do have one question before we open the public hearing,
Yes, sir.
and maybe this is one we discussed at the public hearing. I noticed under the staff report that the sheriff had requested a spot between 190 and 199 feet. Do you know
Yes,
whether that's
sir.
been addressed with, has that been addressed with the applicant?
The conditions of the ordinance require co-location where the county requests that co-location.
At that level, because it appears that it is that level that he needs or something?
We will make sure that it's addressed at that level, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. If there are no questions, at this point, we will declare the public hearing open on SPEX 05-208 Rappahannock Electric Co-op. Anyone wish to speak either for or against this special exception? Is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against this special exception? You're the applicant and wish to speak, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening.
Members of the board. I'm Gary Schwartz, Director of Telecommunications with Rappahannock Electric. I have with me tonight Ron Harris, Manager of Engineering, and Dennis Buchanan, Telecommunications Technician, also the project manager for this specific tower. This tower is critical for Rappahannock Electric to offer the data and voice services for our crews to work during disasters and outages. This tower will facilitate a loop designed for our microwave backbone, which will allow us to redirect our critical data and voice communications during the events such as natural disasters or major outages. It will also facilitate us relocating our Fredericksburg facility, which is our headquarters, and create an alternate disaster site in our Bowling Green office down here, where we can bring the call center down here and the major applications to allow us to address disasters. So we're available for questions, and we do appreciate your consideration for this project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against this special exception? Does the board have any questions of the applicant before I close the public hearing? All right. And here, no further comments. We'll declare the public hearing closed. Does the board have any comments or questions of staff? How does the board wish to dispose of this item?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we accept SPX 05-2008 and grant it with the modification that Mr. Fincham spoke of.
Second.
Motion's been made by Mr. Popowitz, seconded by Mr. Seeley, that we approve SPX 05-208 Rappahannock Electric Co-op with the conditions that Mr. Fincham has and the Planning Commission approved in their approval. Is there a discussion on the motion? All in favor, vote by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay.
Abstain?
One abstention. Mr. Rozell abstains. All right, thank you. Thank you, appreciate you coming out. Next item on the agenda is public hearing for TXT 05-208, 2008. Mr. Fincham, I'll allow you to explain what that ordinance change is.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I believe you can actually hold one public hearing on both of the text amendments.
Okay.
They are both related to the flood ordinances.
All right, the public hearing will be held on text amendment 05-208 and 06-208.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, in your packet you have a staff report as well as the proposed ordinance amendments that govern these two text amendments. TXT 05-2008 would amend Article 15, Section 6, which is the special provisions related to flood hazard zones. And as part of that, you would also be readopting the flood hazard maps that are developed by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. As part of periodic review by FEMA, they go around and evaluate the floodplain regulations of the various localities. Caroline County's regulations were first adopted in August of 1989. As part of their review, they looked at our ordinance and determined that several modifications needed to be made to the ordinance to ensure that it remained consistent with federal regulations. So by repealing and replacing Section 6 and replacing the language with the prescribed language from FEMA, our ordinance would once again be in compliance with the federal regulations, as would the readoption of the maps. The boundaries of the flood areas have not been modified, so we haven't seen any expansion or increase in the areas. However, the underlying base maps have been modified, and the graphics on the new maps are much better than the maps that were created back in the late 80s. The second ordinance amendment is specifically related to definitions contained in Article 2, Section 2 of the ordinance. There are 17 definitions, 14 new definitions, and 3 definitions that are currently in the ordinance that need to be amended to, again, reflect definitions in the federal floodplain regulations. So these new definitions and the amended definitions would once again bring that section of the ordinance into compliance with the current FEMA flood hazard regulations. The board previously held the first reading on this and forwarded both of these items as well as the maps to tonight's meeting for public hearing. And with that, I'll answer any questions that the board may have.
Board have questions of Mr. Fincham? Mr. Rozell?
Mr. Benjamin, just to reflect back to your notes, that basically, if we fail to adopt these, that potentially those who have purchased flood insurance would not be able to cash in on it if we don't make these changes.
Yes, sir. New property owners would not be eligible, and existing property owners might find that they could no longer continue that insurance.
Okay. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rozell. Other questions of Mr. Fincham before we open the public hearing? Thank you. At this point, we'll declare the public hearing open for text amendment 05-208 and text amendment 06-208. Is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against either of these text amendments? Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of or against either of these text amendments? Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of or in opposition to either of these text amendments? Hearing no comment, the public hearing is declared closed. Board have questions of Mr. Fincham? How do you wish to dispose of these? And we need to vote on each one separately.
Separate votes.
First, let's look at text amendment 05-208.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we accept text amendment 05, 2008.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made by Mr. Popowitz, seconded by Mr. Rozell, that we approve the amendment to text 05-208, which is, let's see, an ordinance to amend the zoning ordinance of Caroline County by amending Article 15 supplemental regulations, repealing and replacing Section 6. Discussion on the motion. All in favor vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay, and the motion is carried. The next item is text amendment 06-208. Is there a motion to approve? Or
Move to
deny?
approve.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Rozell, seconded by Mr. Popowitz, that we approve text amendment 06-208. Discussion on the motion. All in favor vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay, and the motion is carried. Thank you, Mr. Fincham. Thank you, Board. Unfinished business. Adoption of resolution concerning collection of federal and state excise fuel taxes. Okay. Mr. Pardon?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as you will recall, the need for a resolution or resolutions of this sort was discussed at the last board meeting, and there were some issues that board members brought up, and staff was asked to go back and try to redraft the resolutions to improve on them. We went back and listened to the concerns again expressed by the board members, and felt like two separate resolutions would be in order, one for the federal government and one for the state, and have prepared resolutions for your consideration that will hopefully address the concerns brought up at the last meeting.
Board members have any questions? Mr. Rozell?
Mr. Chairman, I just, in looking over these, I still think we need to have a little more work, to do on these resolutions. And I think we have time, because certainly from the state point of view, there isn't anything we can get in this year. And then also from the federal point of view, we have a little time as well. So there's just a couple things in here that I think we can make some adjustments on, and we
Okay.
could probably do that between now and the next couple of meetings. But, the ultimate goal is, just to try to find a way, but maybe give some better suggestions on how to do it.
Okay.
And with the timing issues, I think it'll be next year before we can really do anything with General Assembly, and we can continue to send something from a federal point of view even sooner.
Okay.
But right now, I think, there's not much sense in going into much details tonight.
Okay. Other comment? Okay.
I was going to say, I'll get with you later, and you can share your input with me.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Rozell. So we'll wait until later to vote on that resolution. Next item on the agenda is review of potential project for proposed federal economic development stimulus package. Mr. Fincham?
Mr. Chairman, members of your board, I believe you have an addendum that was mailed out to you last night. You also have an addendum that was placed on your at your seats this evening. After the addendum went out, we still had several projects that we were trying to get some final cost estimates on for the board's packet, which is why you have the supplement tonight. We were able to catch up with representatives of King George County and get some more details on the development of their broadband system, which was one of the IT requests that the board had discussed. We have 10 new items. The last 10 items we just picked up with number 43 and did not attempt to reprioritize the entire list of projects. Also, in talking to Dr. Killo today, we identified the 3 potential school projects that the board and school board discussed at your joint meeting earlier this month. We noted at the GWRC meeting last night that Stafford County had also included some school requests in their funding request. So we felt that it was appropriate to try to pull together the school projects that the 2 boards discussed and include those 3 items as potential projects as well. Finally, we did get cost estimates on a number of transportation projects. Most of these are in the Route 1 639 corridor, where we have detailed planning for a number of the improvements in that area. But we also included the request for 4-laning Route 30, which was identified in the Dawn area plan, as well as restoration of funding for the project on the west side of Interstate 95 to improve access to the commercial properties on that side, as well as possible improved access to the intermodal facility that has been discussed. And with that, I'll entertain any questions that the board may have.
Where is the Route 30 transportation project at? What number is that?
That number 52?
It says US 1 improvements.
I'm sorry, I should be Route 30 improvements. The US Route 1 improvements are 50, number
Yeah.
50.
Okay, so it's Route 30. Any of these projects here, does it take in consideration the connector route that we had talked about from Route 639 over to Route 1, replacing basically Route 712?
No, sir, but I have a blank space at the bottom of this page that we can put that one in there.
I think that we probably need to put that in there,
Okay.
because that's going to be helpful for us as far as economic development efforts.
Okay. And while we're at it, if you want, I'll include the north side as well.
Yeah, I think we
The
need to-
full loop.
We just
Okay.
need to do that. And I guess that we probably need to, and Gary, probably need to be thinking in terms of how we're going to present this next week as we go to Washington, because I think this is a prime example of Mr. Popowitz and myself, and I believe Mr. Thomas is going to meet us there. Mr. Ashcraft, you're going, and Mr. Wilson's going. I'm not sure who else. And it's my understanding we have meetings set up with pretty much all the congressional delegation next week. So we need to present this stimulus package idea to them as to what we're looking at. I think we need to be sure to be able to substantiate what we're doing and to show the benefits of not only to Caroline County, but to the region as well as to the Commonwealth. We need to really go into more detail than what we have at this point. I believe what I see attached here. We need to then try to find out what can we do and what do we need to do in order to promote these ideas here and these projects here, because every one of them I think would be a great benefit to Caroline County as a whole. Any other comments from board members? Any questions from staff? Mr. Seeley?
One question. In all the projects, the one that I talked about a year ago is the bridge on 721 at the fire station that's not, I don't know if we've made the National Highways Bridges Fund yet or not, but that bridge is going to be a major cost.
Okay. We can add that to the list.
And there's certainly got to be some, I'm sure that the thinkers in the federal government have thought in terms of criteria that they're going to be looking at to say, yes, something like that needs to be approved. Or are they going to just pass down to the various states a pot of money and say, okay, it's up to you to decide how that money is going to be distributed out? So we need to find out those answers, I think.
Last night at the GWRC FAMPO meeting, a spreadsheet was handed out, which I guess was based on the current discussion of the House resolution related to the expenditure of these funds. It identified approximately $43 billion nationwide for transportation improvements that would be allocated to the states. Of that, Virginia's proportionate share was just under $1 billion for transportation improvements, and that was broken down into highways and bridges, transit, water quality improvement, and existing fixed guideways or some other designation that we're not sure what that means. But collectively, it looks like Virginia, at least in the current working papers, is slated to receive just under $1 billion from this stimulus package for transportation.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fincham. If you would add those two, the last two projects that have been talked about to this list, we'd appreciate it. All right. Next item on the agenda is the proposed adoption of a neighborhood stabilization program agreement. Mr. Bart?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Kevin Burns of George Washington Regional Commission gave a presentation on this topic at the last board meeting, and it's a proposed regional application for federal neighborhood stabilization program funds. And briefly, the program makes funds available to state and local governments to acquire and redevelop foreclosed properties that otherwise might become blight. You received an extensive amount of information both in the presentation and the board packet about the mechanics of the program, so won't go into that again tonight. We'll be happy to answer any questions the board has, of course, but the actions needed by the board if you do want to participate in the regional application were outlined in the board packet memo, and they are adoption of the MOU regarding affordable housing in Planning District 16, as well as adoption of the Regional Neighborhood Stabilization Program Agreement. In addition to that, the board needs to select 2 neighborhoods to target for the stabilization program from the information that Mr. Fincham's office provided last night, and he can answer questions in regard to that. It is the collective opinion of staff and Mr. Burns that it will suffice to simply name 2 neighborhoods rather than getting down into the actual details about where in those neighborhoods the clusters are. And staff has provided an amended resolution that's on your desk that would address the issue of identifying the neighborhoods that we'll obviously fill in when you give us some guidance on that.
Has staff talked to the people at Lake Lando and Lake Caroline? Because to be honest, as you go through this listing, they are the 2 communities that have the highest number of foreclosures in them. Have we talked to the staff at either of those 2?
If you like.
No, sir. We did not have the opportunity to actually discuss each of the properties with the staff of the communities. We really did a real estate search based upon the websites that we had access to that identified foreclosures. The good news is, I think, as far as the county goes, is we had to work very hard to cobble together the number of potential dwellings that we were able to find. There are jurisdictions where you have, say, a townhouse project or other residential project with far greater concentrations of units in foreclosure than we were able to find. We actually had to go down to a street level between intersections to put together potential qualifying properties
Right.
or a list.
Okay. Whatever action the board takes tonight, I would like for you to share with the management at Lake Caroline and Lake Glendale as well as to what we've done and what we've found in our searches. Okay. Does the board have any questions of Mr. Pardon? Mr. Steele?
I guess it's more of Kevin Burns and of Alan, and if you want, I'll wait. I looked at what we were given, and again, what I had heard in the past is we were looking for pretty high densities
Yes, sir.
of homes, which fortunately for us, we don't have. But I guess my concern is in that we have such low density that if we pick houses, and with the presentation we had last month, it looked like substantial amounts of work had to be done. So we were really looking to go into some foreclosed property at a very, very low price to do what work was needed. And I guess what I want to make sure we don't do is hurt real estate values in those neighborhoods when we do that. Because based on, and again, this was the impression I was left with at our last meeting, is that the amount of work in some of these houses that may need to be done, it would be below a rock bottom price. You'd spend a substantial amount of money, and there were fees that came back to the localities to do that, which means that you really have to have a low price to make it worth the while to go in and do that work, get the money out of it, and sell it. And I guess my concern is in some of these neighborhoods, we may impact real estate values dramatically. And I guess that's my first question, and we can start there.
Okay. Well, there is a stipulation in the federal appropriation for this program that does pass through HUD regulations and embodied in the state program regulations where there is a required discount off the fair market price in order to use the program funds for the purpose of property acquisition, rehabilitation, and resale. So while in the short term there may be some minor, I guess, deflationary effect on property values, in the larger scheme of things, I think it's the impression of all the people, advocating and adopting this program that it's far better to get those properties back into productive use and stabilize the neighborhoods where their vacancy and perhaps absentee status, or absent any ownership interest, really to look after the property has a greater impact on perhaps the neighborhood values, if that situation isn't reversed and leading to in neighborhoods where there is even stronger concentrations than you have in Caroline, potential neighborhood blight conditions that would aggravate the problem. So, I think that if the county chose to go forward with this through its representation on the regional management team, and as the chairman pointed out, communication with neighborhood managers where you might be targeting this program, to get the word out in the community that, this it could be a good thing. And also, it also has an additional effect that these properties, because of the depressed value that they have right now, are the target for absentee ownership and rental, whereas at one time they might have been owner-occupied and been a more stable influence in that community. And that is one of the goals of this program, is to try and maintain neighborhood character. And so if, to the extent that this will help prevent some conversion of these neighborhoods to a absentee landlord situation, it might also be in the county's interest.
But we're probably on the opposite end of the spectrum of Spotsylvania or Staffordton, where they have higher densities in some places. Is that not true?
In terms of density, yes, but at times in recent history, Caroline County's rates of foreclosure have been as high as Prince William County, which have been the highest rates in the Commonwealth.
By percentage?
By percentage, yes, sir. And also, based on HUD's analysis of the history of mortgage transactions nationwide, and then mapping out where subprime loans have been in place, the kind of the southern area of Lake Landor, Ladysmith, Commerce, that whole southern belt of the county is where those kinds of loans were concentrated. And so there is, by HUD's very macro level probabilistic model, the potential for some future foreclosures when other mortgages reset with new interest rates.
In fact, there was an article in the Richmond paper a couple of Sundays ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, that said Caroline County had one of the highest
Yes, sir.
rates of foreclosure rates in the state.
Well, 10% of 100 and 10% of 1,000.
I understand. Yeah, I
they're
understand that,
So
but-
we're talking about the same thing.
But the point is, if Caroline County has a high foreclosure rate, whether it's 1, then, and if we're one of the highest in the state and that number is 1, then we need to do everything we can to correct the problem. And we need to straighten the problem out, I think, and to correct. I think another problem you run into is fact in foreclosures is the fact that generally those people are out of the house.
Yes,
The
sir.
house becomes a magnet for vandalism and other things. And so I don't know that it hurts, that benefits a community, is to have vandalism next door to a house that people live in. So I think there are many things you have to look at more so than,
If I might also
what you
offer, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
another, I guess, secondary benefit of this program is that the stimulus effect of the investment of these homes, I mean, the real estate market is down right now, generally speaking, in all facets, including construction and rehabilitation and so forth. So the expenditure of these program monies in the local contracting community to do any rehab necessary in the identified properties and will help, those folks at work.
right.
Kevin, if I remember right,
Yes, sir.
Fredericksburg City has had a similar program since, what, 78, I think it was? Wasn't that what they presented to us?
Well, that is under the broad heading of a community development block grant program. They have been a direct entitlement community from the Federal Housing and Urban Development. But this is a separate program that has been packaged and delivered through the block grant process, but the guidelines and principles and stuff are totally different. The income ranges of eligible households and so forth, they're much more permissive than the low and moderate income spectrum that program addresses.
Based on the list that Mr. Fincham provided to us, or his office provided to us last evening, and I don't know if that includes all of Landor, whether it's just part of Landor, or but there's 17 homes in foreclosure in Lake Landor, based on on the information we have here.
These were just properties that were identified that met the criteria.
Okay.
There may be others within those communities or even other areas of the county that simply we could not figure out a way that it met the 10% threshold.
I see, okay.
So realistically, the community as a whole does not meet the threshold. Belmont and the other developments do not meet the threshold as a whole. That's why, I mentioned earlier, we actually had to look at smaller areas to see whether there were qualifying properties.
Mr. Finch, before you go, part of this program is that we have to do some streamlining of our process if one of these houses comes available in Caroline County. Have we worked on that part of it yet?
The program asks us or recommends that we look at our process. And in fact, the resolution that the other 4 localities have already agreed to related to affordable housing has some of that same language in there. To consider that would require some ordinance amendments. We have not done those or prepared those ordinance amendments as of yet. We would need to craft those with the assistance of the county attorney. So you've got the issue, how do you, narrowly apply those standards?
Okay.
Mr. Rozelle?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fincham, are there any other costs associated with this that you all have been able to identify that would cost county other than the in-kind?
There have been no requests for direct financial assistance from the county. I think Mr. Burns is aware that given the shrinking budgets, that's a problem, not only for this jurisdiction, but any other jurisdiction. And the idea is to use the Central Virginia housing and to try to leverage that as much as possible. Even some of the costs in the program, they're looking at deferring those costs to later in the process versus up front.
To supplement what Mr. Fincham said, we had a task force meeting this morning. We were talking about one of the things that's required, whether it was a local application or a regional application, would be a demonstration of additional community resources, not necessarily public resources, but community resources that are dedicated and can leverage and have an increased multiplier effect by bringing dollars to the table to match with the NSP program dollars. And the group, well represented by local staff people, understand the tight fiscal conditions that all the local governments face right now. And it's probably not much better out there in the business community either. But there are representatives at the table that feel that with some very focused and tight delivery of a message of need, that a targeted pitch will go out to the corporate community and specifically to the banking and mortgage community to say, would you help us build up that community leveraging asset base to strengthen our program and stretch these program dollars farther. So we're trying to identify that program and bring the banking interests and mortgage companies and so forth together and make that pitch to them. And we don't have it in writing or a firm commitment, but there is the hint of major banking interest that is going to sort of offer a kind of a seed pledge and see how many of their peers will kind of match that number. And so we're going to try and parlay that into, a seed account that Central Virginia Housing Coalition could manage and use to stretch the program dollars further.
And what's your timeline on the regional effort? Did you want to try to get all this?
Yes,
Yeah.
the application, the window of application opens on Friday. It closes in sometime in April, but since everybody in the Commonwealth is feeling the pinch of these economic times, there's going to be some fierce competition for these program funds. And unlike some other programs in which you can't use federal dollars to match federal dollars, in this particular instance, the entitlement communities like Fredericksburg, Richmond, Norfolk, other places that have been longtime participants in the federal HUD program have resources available that they can pledge to supplement whatever grant they might get. Consequently, the feeling that there was a large delegation from virtually all the communities and Central Virginia Housing Coalition that went to the How to Apply workshop that was put on a couple weeks ago, and there was a unanimous consensus feeling that the region needs to put its best foot forward early and try and stake a claim, because between Stafford and Spotsylvania, they're in the top 5 in terms of the volume of foreclosures in the state. So based on need, there's a strong interest on the state's part to target some of those monies into this region. And in Caroline's historic rate of foreclosure, which is another factor that goes into the scoring of the applications, is another contributing, bonus for the prospects of a regional award. So the communities of interest here, Spotsylvania Board is considering it tonight, and the Stafford Board is considering it next Tuesday. And it's anticipated that based on this round of political discussions, that then those that have committed to it will be represented in a proposal that will be sent to Richmond by the end of next week. So time is of the essence here.
And my last question is, would there be any problem if we would ask to add like an opt-out clause in here that if we saw things that didn't?
Well, the opt-out, there is a 60-day opt-out clause in the agreement now, sir.
It's not in our resolution, but it's in the agreement.
It's in the agreement that,
resolution?
that you are asked to consider. Let me find that for you.
Okay, well, show me where that is.
Article 12, which appears on page 8 of the agreement portion of the package, begins, the heading is at the bottom of page 8, and the text appears on the top of page 9. And should any of the local governments that enter into this agreement, basically what it says is, should you decide that you want out at some point, obviously there may be some deals in the works that, depending upon where they are in the acquisition process, they may have it may be an irreversible action that ultimately will lead to one final property acquisition or something. So, they basically clear any current actions that are irreversible, suspend any additional acquisition negotiations, and then any agreement, any of the administrative fees that would have accrued to the county will be held in escrow, and the next time a distribution made, the county would get its settlement portion of that escrow account.
Okay.
Other questions?
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Popowitz, you have any other questions? Mr. Seeley, you have any other questions? All right. How does the board wish to handle this issue?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's some good opportunities here for us. I understand Mr. Seeley's concern, and I still see that, our attorneys will sign off on this for us, and they'll have a chance to see if they haven't already reviewed the opt-out agreement, which I think is a key factor that, what we commit to, we have to deal with, but after that, we can get out. So that's one good thing. So I think the next item is, which areas we're looking at. It looks like most of the numbers are Lake Caroline, Lake Landor.
Lake Landor is the biggest, yeah.
Yeah. And it's just because where most of the houses are.
That's it.
That's the reason.
Yeah.
And I know we're approaching the deadline. So it makes, I see more benefits than anything else at this point. And I'd like to make a motion that we amend the accept the amended resolution and include Lake Caroline and Lake Landor as the two neighborhoods targeted.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Rozell and seconded by Mr. Popowitz that we adopt the amended resolution or proposed adoption of the Neighborhood Stabilization Program Agreement. Mr. Fincham, you had a comment before we vote on the motion?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, if you like, you could actually delegate the authority to the county administrator
Okay.
on your behalf. So if for some reason one of those two communities did not work out, then the flexibility would be there to designate another, perhaps community. So we ultimately have to send one or two
Right.
if you adopt it, but you can pass that discretion to the county administrator.
Okay.
And that way, if there are any concerns raised, we can make sure those are addressed and we aren't left without.
Mr. Roselle, you said you would
I
make
would
the motion.
amend
Mr.
that.
Popovich, you in a second, okay.
Mr. Chairman, question.
Mr. Seeley.
And I don't have a problem with the county administrator, but would we stay with the list that we have in terms of, we won't stray from this?
No, sir. We'll stick to this list.
Because these are the ones that you've identified that meet the criteria, so it's not a matter of trying to
I'm
get
just
some.
making
yeah,
sure we
no, I
weren't
understand.
still looking
No, I understand.
and trying to decide.
That's correct. Yes, sir. Well, if for some reason one of these communities fell out of consideration, there are some others that we could actually tap into in order to maximize the application.
Okay. You've heard the amended motion,
Mr. Chairman, would there be any problem with including the adoption of the MOU for affordable housing as outlined in number 1 recommendation and under summary for your board packet, executive summary? Any problem with it?
Does that need to be part of this resolution adoption as well?
I think it would be appreciated by the other local governments, because to adopt the NSP thing is kind of like putting the cart before the horse, because the MOU really preceded this. It's just due to a delay in getting it to your attention. You would have considered this perhaps months ago.
Mr. Roselle?
Well, Mr. Chairman, do you think I need to withdraw my motion and do this one first?
And I think maybe withdraw your motion and withdraw your second, and if you want to make the motion to
Withdraw.
include both the resolution and the MOU together in one motion.
Okay. Okay. I withdraw my motion.
Second.
I'm sorry?
They should be two separate.
Mr. Burns says that they can be
Okay.
be together.
Either individually or together is fine.
Okay, yeah. Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the memorandum of understanding for the Plan District 16 regarding the affordable housing.
The second. Motion by Mr. Roselle, seconded by Mr. Seeler, that we approve the memorandum of understanding for Region 16 as presented. Discussion on the motion. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay, and the motion is carried.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the amended resolution, which included Lake Caroline, Lake Landor, and the county administrator as the alternate.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Roselle, seconded by Mr. Popowitz, that we adopt the Neighborhood Stabilization Program amendment, the amended resolution. And part of that motion is that Mr. Ashcraft will serve as the liaison, if you will, to determine which neighborhoods, if one of the neighborhoods, Lake Caroline, Lake Landor, opts out or does not follow through, you have the authority to select another community to put in that place. Is there discussion on that motion? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay, and the motion is carried. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you, Mr. Burns, for coming out this evening. The next item on the agenda is number 14, proposed use of gov deals for the online auction of surplus assets.
I thought we pulled that.
Didn't we pull that off?
We pulled that one, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
We
sir.
did pull?
Removed.
We sure did, okay. I'm sorry, we pulled it. All right, well, we're down to informational calendar items. 2008 Department, did we pull that?
No, that's for information, Mr. Chairman. As the annual reports get completed by staff, I'm just going to put them in your packets and send it to you. And if you have questions or comments about them, I'd appreciate you hearing from that. And we also will have those online when they can be put up. And the one that's in your packet this evening is the Planning and Community Development Department.
Okay.
So
All right.
the other item is that you regularly get an update on the drug discount program that NACO has offered for the last couple of years. We give you periodically the statistics of use in that program and how it's serving our citizens. Again, rather than giving a presentation, if the board has a question, Mr. Parton kind of keeps on top of that program and may be able to answer it, or we can get social services to provide more information.
Well, I don't know that I want a presentation, but I think it's important that we do recognize that this program, which is sponsored through the National Association of Counties, and our dues for the National Association of Counties, I believe, is $360 a year, something thereabouts. It has saved the citizens of Caroline County over the last 3 years in excess of $52,000. So I think that speaks well of the program and speaks well of this board in supporting a program such as this that benefits the residents of Caroline County. And for the most part, the people that have benefited have been people that have less been able to pay the higher cost. It's been the people that have really needed the assistance and the help. So I'm proud of that program and glad Caroline County is part of that program. Mr. Ashcraft?
Mr. Chairman, now just referring to some calendar items, on Thursday of this week in this auditorium, the Chamber of Commerce will hold their annual installation of officers, and then I will be giving an update to the membership there on the state of the county affairs. That all begins at 7 o'clock. The next evening is also the Fredericksburg Chamber's Awards and Gala, which is at the National Museum. I don't know if any of our board members are planning to attend that or not. Does Mr. Seeley attend? Oh, good, good. We'll have representation there. And we do have a very important week coming up, next week, with some of our board members will be attending meetings on Capitol Hill with several of our federal legislators. That'll be on February the 4th. And then on February the 5th, some of us will be going down to Richmond to meet with, if we can, to meet with our state legislators as part of a legislative briefing that's known as VACO VML Day. That all begins at 12 o'clock. And then that evening, I've given each of you a letter as an update on the CTB's final public hearing and opportunity to speak on the 6-year plan. And I understand that, Mr. Chairman, you'll be offering remarks on behalf of the board to kind of solidify the projects that we'll be advocating for to be included in that plan. And then on leading us up to the next board meeting on February the 10th, that will begin with a work session at 4:30, and that will be a work session that will be related to the rate study that they will present to us. The chairman has asked that the rate study be top priority, and then we can deal with the increase in the plant capacity at a future meeting. The rate study probably will need to be worked out before we can move forward with the other information. So that will be at 4:30 on February the 10th. I believe that's all the information items I have this evening, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ashcraft. And the reason I did ask that the two be separated is because they both are of great importance. And I was concerned that if we weren't careful starting at 4:30 and the regular meeting starting at 6 o'clock, we would try to compress too much into a short period of time. So I just thought it was better to have a rate increase of the rate study presentation to discuss that thoroughly, and then move on to the other issues as far as increased capacity at another meeting. All right, closing board comments. Mr. Popowitz?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Seeley?
No, sir.
Mr. Rozelle?
I have none.
Well, and neither do I. Closed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry if I could take a few more minutes. I thought Mr. Rozelle might address this, but I feel like it's important to note that we had our first meeting on the state fair preparation. And it was, I thought, a very good meeting. We've had a couple follow-up conversations with the folks that were there. And As you know, the State Fair coming to Caroline and ultimately it opening is going to be a big event here. And there's an awful lot that has to go into the preparation of that event. And we had maybe 35, 40 people in the EOC next door attending, everybody who had a role in what that preparation will entail. And there'll be follow-up meetings over the next, every other month leading up to the September Fair. So we feel like we're on top of it, and everybody's talking about it, and everybody's working together very well to have, as to quote Mr. Rozelle, the best fair we could possibly have. And it's here, it's coming, and now we want to do it right. So it was a good meeting. I don't know, Mr. Rozelle, if you had any other follow-up on that or not. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ashcraft.
And in addition to the closed meeting motion on the prospect, we need one on personnel.
Okay. Is that part of that motion that's been handed out?
It
It is.
is? I
It
didn't
is
see
not. No, it is not.
Mr. Chairman.
It is? Okay.
I think we probably told him probably need to come. I told him probably need to come. He wouldn't be as likely to come. He'll be thinking of it. The personnel issue, which is yeah, I think I'll get everything. That's what I'm saying. Not just for that 2 minutes. Okay. All right, we're just going to deal in closed session with the closed session meeting motion that you have on in front of you, Mr. Rozelle. Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we convene to a closed meeting in personnel, exemption code of Virginia 15-23711A1.
We can strike that one. We're not going to discuss that now.
Okay,
Number 2, I'm sorry.
my apologies. I'll take that one and remove it. But I move that we go into for a prospective business exception for code of Virginia 15-23711A5. Involves discussion of a prospective business where no previous announcement had been made of the business interest and located in Caroline County.
Motion by Mr. Rozelle, second by Mr. Popowitz, that we approve motion to go into, or to convene closed meeting. And you heard the section that we were going into closed meeting on. Discussion on the motion. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion is carried. The board will take a 10-minute recess, and then we'll go into closed session.
Items under the, that we went under for?
Popowitz, do you so certify?
I so certify.
Mr. Seeley?
I so certified.
Mr. Rozelle?
Yeah, and the-
Certified, and I so certified. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Popowitz, second by Mr. Seeley. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
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 All opposed, nay. Motion's carried, and it's been a pleasure this evening, gentlemen.
It's been nice, but it hasn't been real nice, Wayne. I said it's been nice, but it hasn't been real nice, Wayne.